So this is an opportunity for you guys to share with us what would be involved in a solar moratorium, what the timeline would look like.
Did you want to set the?
I think everyone knows this is a briefing, so we're just hearing from our staff so you guys can hear everything that's going on. We don't take public comment, but we're also not making a decision today. If we decide at this meeting to bring it forth to a decision, then it would go to a public hearing where public comment would be heard. Okay.
We also welcome you guys' feedback, share it with us through phone calls, emails, future meetings, things like that. But today's only a half-hour meeting just to get
just to know what would it involve if we did a moratorium.
So we wanted to give you kind of a list. There's a very general list. I took a look at about a half a dozen different counties and what they were doing. 5 of them in Colorado and 1 in Kansas. And the reason I looked at the Kansas one is they had a really good code. But obviously we want to stick with Colorado and Colorado law. But wanted to give you kind of an idea of what we take a look at, or really get direction from you guys in terms of what we would want to be taking a look at if we did go into a moratorium, and if we did want to amend the land use code for the electricity generation. I'm going to say that broadly because there are a lot of opportunities and different things that we can look at as we go through this. Really, the first thing that you can take a look at, or if you want to take a look at, is we can revisit the 2011 Mesa County Mineral and Energy Resources Master Plan. What I'm going to do is, unless you want to ask us what our opinion is, we're just going to lay these out for you and then let you take a look at it. If we wanted to revisit that master plan, more than likely we would have to hire a consultant to do that, probably not do that in-house. To go through that with a consultant would be a lot like going through the master plan, which we just did. So that's looking at between 9 and 12 months.
Did we hire a consultant for the original energy master plan? I don't remember.
I assume we did.
I don't remember if it was Olson or who it was that did that. And what they were looking at primarily is trying to tie that to the 2018 COGCC rules and create some maps that we could then have an online layer that we could utilize for decision-making purposes in that mapping scenario.
We did that in 2011. So the 2018.
Well, so it was the 2008 rules that made, it was 2008 rules that brought that up.
Okay. And obviously it's a very general plan, so it deals with oil, gas, everything. The thing that we need to just be honest about is if we were to go through that first, that does not change the land development code. It's a guiding document to help you change the land development code. So we'd be looking at a 9 to 12 month process to go through a revisit or a rewrite of the energy master plan. And then we'd be looking at another 6 to 12 months to amend the land development code. Reason I say 6 to 12 is it depends on what comes out of that rewrite of the energy master plan in terms of how much we need to change or not change. And that's the difference between the 6 and the 12 months. And we'll get into that a little bit as we take a look at what we would need to really do to amend the land development code. And from this point on, I'll just say LDC. So if you hear that, it's the land development code. So that's your first option, to go through that. The next option would be to just take a look at amending the CUP, the conditional use permit approval criteria. I've got it listed in there. We right now only have 3 criteria for approval of a conditional use permit. They're very general in nature. We could add more criteria to that, more conditions on the approval of the CUP. The thing that we need to be aware of is that would affect all CUPs and not just CUPs for this, for electricity generation. To amend that could take up to 9 months. I assume we could probably get that done within 6. Again, depending on how much we want to add to that criteria. So we're probably looking at about 6 months if we just want to amend the CUP approval criteria. The next option would be to actually add a use-specific standards to section 6.2. So within our LDC, we've got table 6-1, and that's the matrix that shows all the uses and how they're allowed in the zones. Then we have, on top of that, additional standards for many uses. And that would be for mobile home parks, for oil and gas, for different things, we've got separate standards. And what a lot of communities will do, instead of taking processes through conditional use permit through the public process, they'll just add those standards to site-specific uses. In other words, so you can get them through quicker and you don't have to go through a public process. And quite honestly, if we add those and you do a CUP for it anyhow, those are the standards they would have to meet. And so the public process allows a public opportunity, obviously, in front of the Planning Commission, in front of the Board of County Commissioners to review what's being proposed. So what many counties do under that specific use standards would be, one of the things we would want to do is, would we want to identify different electrical generation? There is wind, there's hydro, there's solar. Right now, we don't break that apart. We just call it a basic utility and production. And it doesn't matter whether it's any three of those. Still has to go through the conditional use permit process. The other thing is that some communities define different bars, if you will, between administrative and through the hearing process. Some of those communities define those by megawatts, some by acreage, some by type. So, a wind farm might require a public use hearing, whereas a 2 megawatt solar facility would not. And so that's the kind of thing we can look at as we go through those standards. The other thing that we would probably want to look at if you wanted to go through those specific use standards is really identifying the difference between residential, commercial, and utility scale electric generation. And again, that has to do with solar, wind, and hydro. We've got small hydro plants that go in even in irrigation ditches now. And right now, we, as the planning department, kind of take a look at that. And if it's generating just electricity for the residents, obviously we don't take them through the process. If they're generating electricity where they're putting that electricity into the distribution, then obviously we take them through the CUP process, what you've seen with the solar facility. We did that too with the hydro up on the Colorado too, right? We did. Yeah. So we have taken other. We haven't had any proposals for wind, and so we haven't done that other than the small ones for residential. So that would be something that we'd want to probably take a look at as part of these site-specific standards, whether it's an administrative process, whether it's a public hearing process. Again, regardless of whether it's administrative or public hearing, we would probably follow our current process, which would be a pre-application. We could add a preliminary concept plan if we wanted to. We could add neighborhood meetings to it if you wanted to. And then the process, whether it's approved administratively by staff, if you will, or whether it goes through the CUP process, which would be Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners for our community. Some of the standards that are included within those site-specific standards would be separation standards. Some communities have a certain foot, if you will, separation, some 200 feet, some 300 feet from residential, from agricultural, from other similar uses. I saw one where you had to separate another, and might as well just talk about solar facility, another solar facility by so many feet. So we could add those kind of things in there. You can add discussion of visual impacts, buffering, screening, which would really be associated with landscaping and fencing. Dimensional standards. Those would be dimensional standards in terms of the structure of the facility themselves, so the height of the structure. Setbacks, if we wanted to add setbacks, that the structures had to be further setback than what we currently require for structures. And we do consider solar structures, though, that facility, those are structures, so they have to be set back by the zoning requirement currently, and we can add to that if that's something you wanted to do under the use-specific standards. Zoning location restrictions. Those don't happen often. Mostly have to do with removing them out of residential zones and putting them into more open zones. Most of our zoning is AFT, so it would be difficult to try and do zoning location restrictions within the AFT unless you wanted to add more zones, which only complicate and make the process larger. But something we could certainly do if that was needed. 1041, a couple of the counties did require processes to go through their 1041 permitting. We have not adopted 1041, so that would be something that we would have to do if that's something that you would look at. The 1041, it's been a while since I've worked with a community that actually has that. Generally, the 1041 standards are standards that a community puts in place that are over and above what the state standards are. And so you adopt 1041 because you don't want oil and gas wells within certain.
Can I interject?
Please do.
1041 standards are, 1041 references the Senate bill that passed it. It allows the state, or allows a local government to pass regulations for specified areas of state interest or certain locales that can be designated, and you're not subject to preemption. Whereas normally the state can preempt the local government laws and the state law controls. Here, our law would control.
But you can't reduce, you can only increase.
Correct.
Yeah.
Or restrict more than.
Well, I drafted 1041 regulations for another county that had geothermal because geothermal is an area of interest.
So, quite honestly, I didn't get into those too deeply because we just haven't adopted those yet. If you want to, that would add another layer to this process too, if you wanted to adopt 1041.
Isn't that what our LDC is?
That's my
feeling.
feeling.
1041 in practice.
Emergency services that can be added to the sites or the specific use standards, fire protection. Application requirements can be added to those too, where you within the LDC would identify the requirements of the application. So development plan, an environmental impact analysis, traffic study, scheduling, all that stuff could be added. Several communities do it a little bit differently than we do, where each process that they go through, whether it's a site plan, conditional use permit, subdivision, they lay out the application requirements within each one of those sections of the code. That's why their codes are 300-400 pages long, because they have that in there. But we can certainly do that on just this and not do it for others. We can, we've got a lot of flexibility with that. To get to what that process would take in terms of adding specific use standards under Section 6, I put in there up to 12 months because I don't know exactly what we want yet. It could take as little as 6 months, and it could take as many as 12 months. It really depends on what we're adding to it, how deep we're getting into it, the complexity, the detail, that kind of thing. And so generally our codes have been written very flexible. And so if we were to keep that, then I would expect the process to probably be within that 6-month time frame. It might be able to be, again, if all we're doing is looking at separation, we just want to say it needs to be set back so far from the property lines, it needs to be separated so far from residential. That can be done probably in 3 months. That's pretty simple and pretty straightforward. Just realize too, though, that to amend the LDC, we do have to go through Planning Commission and the Board of County Commissioners. So we have a couple of months just for notification and posting, all those kind of things to get to it. So that always adds a little more time to it. And the last we just threw this in there. It's not that we think there are a couple of things we should probably change it anyhow, but obviously we can just keep the status quo also. That's certainly an option, depending on what the board feels. So in the nutshell, that's a very quick kind of general discussion of really the amount of time it would take to take a look at this. And it really depends on really where we want to go with the amount of restrictions, the amount of standards, those kinds of things that we want to add to. And we could just completely focus on solar and not worry about hydro and wind. We could add those two, and again, that just lengthens it out.
And there's benefits in just doing solar, because then you can get in there, get it done, quick and dirty, include the community, because that's the whole point of this. Does the 2011 Energy Resource Master Plan, does that show desirable areas for mining, extraction, energy production? That doesn't.
It's strictly oil and gas.
Well, no, it talked about solar and a few others, but the focus was on oil and gas. With creating a map, a GIS system where you could be in Texas and own some land and see where the best place is to site an oil well. So it was really focused more on that, but it does mention.
But we could expand it to all forms of energy, where it's appropriate, where the community wants it, things like that. But that wouldn't dictate where you can actually put it, though. You'd have to update your LDC and land use.
Yeah, and I stand corrected. It did talk about those other energy sources, but it was focused on oil and gas. And you could, with that same mapping idea, what it did is it took the decision matrix out of the COGC's rules for land use, and it gave specific places where targets could be located for surface based on subsurface activities, things like that. And it briefly touched on the other aspects of the utilities, other generation. That map could be pulled back out and revised, make some changes to it. If we're looking at a map like that, that map would be very valuable to people that are buying property. It would be very valuable to decision makers. It might be very valuable to providers that look at an area and say, okay, it has the necessary interconnect availability. It has the necessary zoning. And again, you go back to the discussion of the LDC and how much the LDC would need to be amended to meet those kinds of aspects. It depends on the detail that one might want to put into that map and what that then would have to be crafted into the LDC.
So I'm assuming you're talking about effectively creating an overlay zone that says uses or certain uses would be allowed in these.
Recognizing that there's an appropriate place for solar in this community, there's also inappropriate places for solar in this community.
Would that cover other?
At the base of the Book Cliff, I think, is probably an inappropriate place.
And that's how the map did before, because it would say, here's your wildlife corridors, here's your scenic bypass. So it didn't necessarily say they couldn't, but the producers knew, I don't need to be putting them in a wildlife corridor or something like that.
Yeah, it's what the community wants. It's not in law, but it's what the community envisions for this product. It could inform commissioners at a CUP hearing.
And could inform people before they go buy land that is already appropriately zoned for solar to know here's some of the things they might be coming up against.
I also think one thing that might be helpful is just the underlying infrastructure. So if you're going to have a solar project, what does the underlying infrastructure? What load can it have? What's the capacity? How much are they going to have to invest in this before they get down the road? We've done all this work. And then they realize, I can't even plug into that, or I need millions more for this infrastructure. And I think our energy partners need to be able to have conversations to be able to share best practices. Can a solar be up against a solar? What does that look like? I just think having more information and diving a little deeper, I'd rather spend the time and be really thoughtful and get it right with our community members and having these conversations and seeing things around the corner and just get it right than just put a Band-Aid on it or just look at one thing. I would rather spend the time, do our due diligence, and get it right for future generations. So they're not having to put Band-Aids on it along the way. So I think you've given us a lot of good options, so thank you.
And that map with respect to our utility providers has a couple of challenges with respect to that, because there is some infrastructure that's easy to map and you put it in place and it's big general ideas. The more strategic nature of those utility providers, they don't necessarily want to put out there for everybody, but we could potentially get that sort of information or layers that the staff has access to.
Yeah.
That would still allow for those decisions. And a lot of that original mapping was to help everybody think about where could we put oil and gas well, or where does it maybe fit, where is the wildlife corridors that you talk about, all of those constricting parameters that were in effect with respect to those sorts of opportunities.
You said Kansas. Where at Kansas?
I have to go back and look at it. It was actually a great code.
Okay.
I don't think it would have changed much what you already approved, but it really did take into a lot of different aspects of where it should be located. It had a bar in terms of anything below, I think it was 2 megawatts was approved administratively. Anything above, or it was below 5 megawatts, anything above 5 megawatts or certain acreage had to go through public hearing process. Again, those things can be adjusted to any, they're arbitrary and up to the community to decide how they want to do it.
Sure, and I would like an administrative process for something reasonable.
Right.
But to a certain scale, yeah, I think it should remain in the CUP. The whole point of this meeting today, at least the title of it, was consider a moratorium. Where I come from, moratoriums are a bad word. I don't like moratoriums. There isn't a lot of specificity within our code for solar, which leaves landowners, neighbors, developers, energy producers, those type of people just kind of in limbo, hoping that a CUP will or will not be approved. So I would like to see it be more predictable for the community as a whole. Yet at the same time, I don't want to restrict the use of someone's property in the meantime. So I guess in a perfect world, in 3 months, we could have an updated CUP process, or in our table, specific standards within that table where the uses are allowed, things like that. But at the same time, you still have to have a community process. And so you're saying the quickest that we could get this done, if we're just updating, I don't think we need to update our CUP process in general, but just our use table, right? What's the quickest we could update our use table with adequate community input? And then in the future, then we can start maybe updating our energy resource master plan, and then updating LDC in the future. But how can we provide predictability, public input, and let people get back to using their land to the most productive use, essentially?
If we were just looking at amending Table 6-1, which would be literally to put solar facility, that kind of thing. And then to add something, and I'll say minimal, so certain setbacks from other uses, something to do with maybe some buffering, something like that. I'm sorry, but I'd still lean between that 3 and 6 months. Just to get everybody involved, to go through the process, to get it in front of Planning Commission, initially to get it in front of the Code Focus Group for their review of it, and take their input. Once we get it, basically nailed out, then it needs to go out to the public, obviously. Generally, we use a 21-day, for public comment on something like that too. That's before we even schedule meetings. Now we can do the 21-day public comment. and then go ahead and kind of schedule the planning commission within maybe 2 weeks after that 21-day, because we need time to obviously add that too. So I would say at a minimum 4 to 6, and
Heavy towards the 6.
yeah.
What does a moratorium process look like?
It comes before you, a resolution comes before you as a board and you approve it at a
There's no
regular.
first, second readings, it's
No
just a
first, second
resolution.
readings, just
It can be
one
done
meeting.
next Tuesday.
It could be done next Tuesday.
Well, we're not here next Tuesday because it's day after Christmas. But
But we could do it for X amount of months, and then if we wanted to, we could extend it.
You can extend it, you can terminate it early, whatever.
Yeah, if we were to get it done quicker, obviously, you'd turn off.
we could be specific about what that moratorium is.
What we'll do during that
Utility
moratorium.
scale, I mean, rooftop installers aren't gonna have to stop installing.
Exactly. You could specifically accept rooftop installers on personal homes, personal.
Well, residential, because we've got some that are ground mounted too, that are for residential. But yeah, we would make sure that those would be excluded.
I'm more comfortable with the 4 to 6 months as well, as opposed to the 2 years with the first one. That's a long time for people that have a property right, who knows how much they've already invested in planning to do this, and then we just say, oh, never mind, for 2 years. So I like the 4 to 6 months, looking at the standards, but that doesn't mean we can't go ahead and update our energy master plan, looking at all the different energy. And the maps, from what I heard from Chris Cadell, he can't even bring up those old maps. GIS has changed so much since then that they would need to start over from scratch. So maybe this is now something we want to do long-term, but short-term, get our new standards in place specific to solar.
Hadn't had that conversation with him, so.
Just a couple weeks ago. Good with that, 4 to 6 months, and you have a question?
Yeah, does that mean that no applications would be accepted in that period, or they'd just be put on hold, or would that?
Well, under a true moratorium, yeah, you can't, applications would not be accepted.
Even if they were accepted, they wouldn't be processed, right?
You probably wouldn't want to accept them because then you might change the standards by which you govern them. So I wouldn't want to create an argument that you accepted an application under this standard, so it should be judged by that.
So
Then we'll work with the attorney to get a moratorium resolution to
we can do
you.
that on January 9th.
We can have that easily for January 9th.
Is that-
Give them direction to development. And in the meantime, I guess, start developing, or we need to start talking about maybe an RFP for someone to come in and redo our resource management plan, update our LDC.
We could do the LDC. I'm
Just
pretty comfortable.
You're
on
talking about just the one.
Section 602.
what we would do is add a specific use criteria to a section, or standards to section 6.02, which would identify, in this case, my feeling is what we want to do is concentrate on solar generation. And so we would add that to 602. We would add it to 6-1 under the use table. And then what we can do is initially we can maybe do a best guess in terms of here's what you could put under that. We can run that by you guys to see if it's not enough, it's too much. And then you can give us direction that we can then take it to the code focus group and let them take a look at it.
I guess that's the question. Where's the community engagement in that process where we say, community, where do you want, how do you want to regulate it? I'm not saying they dictate the process, but there's got to be community input for that. So where does that process happen?
The way it currently is written under code, the way we've currently done it, is it occurs after the draft of the amendment to the.
So they have something to look at and comment on.
And
Now-
that's that 21-day period.
Yeah.
Couldn't we have a public meeting, an open house of some kind, like you've done for other times? People could come, get a better understanding of it, make comments written, that type of a thing.
We can certainly add that. It may
Sure.
stretch the timeline out. But yes, we could certainly.
What you guys did with the master plan was great.
Yeah, but that took 18 months.
Right, but.
Can you do that in 3 months?
Absolutely,
Should
of
just
course.
be one.
Of
In
course.
addition to giving them 21 days to respond, during that time, have a meeting where you can explain it.
Yeah, we could have an open house just to get input, use that input to say, okay, this is what we heard. We can bring that in front of you. You can decide if that's a good direction or if we need to crank it up, lower it.
And then separately, if we're revisiting the 2011 energy, we would need to hire a consultant for
Yeah.
that. But we can do that.
That can be done completely
simultaneously.
separately, yeah. Yeah, same time or even afterwards.
Do you want to come?
We can't, I
Public?
guess, we're supposed to be done. You have a quick question?
Can I ask a quick legal question? If you were to decide to put a moratorium in place starting on January 9th, what would happen, this is for the lawyer, I believe, to the applications that come in the meantime?
That's a good question.
Mr. Lawyer?
I'm not sure I heard, an application comes in between now and January 9th?
Yeah, that's the question.
We would process that application under today's rules.
How about the ones that have already been approved?
Those are already approved.
Those are already
They're
approved.
approved. We don't-
So what do you mean?
Yeah, it would still be a problem.
Couldn't affect anything that were to be applied for before.
Moratorium on future applications.
Yeah, it would, starting on that date.
Those that are in thought process and are in process right now, if they get those applications in by January 9th, then
Theoretically, yes.
Yeah, it's much the same way as if the law changes for the LDC and they come in and with an application. And then we change the LDC post their application. They're grandfathered to what the old LDC said.
but it would not hold up the conversation of a moratorium.
No, it wouldn't slow down. It'll be concurrent discussions if we do see an application come in. Right now, we don't have anything.
Also, those applications would have to be complete. In other words, they couldn't just walk in and submit
Here's a piece of paper.
an application saying, or they have to.
Not a
have some-
pre-application, then it has to be the full
Right.
application.
Right,
Okay.
and start the review process, which also goes to completeness, et cetera, but it would have to be a pro as from our point of view, and submit that for project review.
Did you have a quick question or did we answer it?
Yeah, he did. I guess I have a follow-up. Sort of just got into this in email about an hour ago. So the ones that are approved, there are some regulations on fencing and all that. Is that somewhere?
It's in the CUP that was approved.
And they're in the
Is it
process.
online somewhere?
It would be part of the application that was approved.
Right.
So he wants to know if it's online. where
So
they
if
can
you
see
were,
what's happening.
to go into the portal, the customer portal, and type in the address of any particular project, and this is good for any project in the county. If you go into the Mesa County's customer portal, and there's a big bar across the middle, and if you just type an address into that, it will pull up the records and such for that address.
If I know the
And anything
address.
if you don't know the address, if you know the parcel, you can read a map. You
Okay,
can
yeah,
figure out
I can
what's
find
going on.
that. I was doing that today.
So
for
if you
something
go
else.
in there and do that, then it'll pull up all the records and all the permits and all the
Okay.
sorts of things that are
I
available
told my-
publicly.
I used to do environmental assessments. Sean, I worked there for
She's
you.
telling you what happens.
Right.
So
Right.
it'll allow you to pull up all of those records and all of those permits and all the publicly available information that's on that particular site. So if you wanted to know what your neighbor was building next door, you could do that.
I'll give you a call when it's good.
Thanks, everybody.
Hey, one last one, just so we know in general that, the moratorium is put in place, which it appears that it's going to be, that there's something stated that won't take place indefinitely.
Oh, that would be part of the resolution.
It would give-
Okay.
The 4 seasons.
Thank you.
An indefinite moratorium is unconstitutional.
Okay.
I wouldn't support that. 4 to 6 months is what I'm supporting right now, so. But we haven't made a decision.
Thank you.
That'll come on January 9th.
Takes that long to get it going.
Bye, guys.
Thanks,
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody, for coming in today.
Thanks for letting us come in today.
Yes, really appreciate it.